Around Hornby's got no protection whatsoever. There's one little rockfish conservation area, which is right out here, but the rest of it is basically managed by regulation, by how many fish you can catch and all that kind of stuff. But there's no actual protection. And so we decided we wanted to change the focus of what the Conservancy was doing around that. And that's what we've been doing. It has by just recognizing and respecting the Aboriginal rights and title of the Comox and Pentlatch people whose territory we're in and who have lived here and wonderfully managed the resources around our island for 12,000 years. They managed to leave the resources in as good a shape as they found it. I only hope we could do as well as them. Yeah, so this gets back to why are we here? So Conservancy Hornby Island last year decided that we wanted to focus on the marine environment. The marine environment, because the land on Hornby is fairly well protected. There's park, we got a good chunk of it's parks. The crown land you can't do much with. There's bike riding trails. There's very little protection around the marine environment around the island. There's one rockfish conservation area out of Forest Cove, and that's it. So the concern is, a lot of the stocks are way down. So we wanted to start this this marine conservation initiative, we call it. So the first thing we wanted to do in the first year was, we had two objectives which we're doing right now. One is we want to collect all the data, as much information on the marine, so you can see all the maps and everything, was collecting the data. And the second part was to inform people, Hornby Islanders, and that's part of what we're doing right now, obviously. We want to start building a plan. That's the idea, is for Hornby to develop a marine use plan, something like the land plan. We will be able to go out and go to organizations like the First Nations, the three levels of government that we have. We have First Nations government that holds the Aboriginal title, and we have the two crown titles, provincial crown title and federal crown title. So those eventually will be involved in the process. The Islands Trust gets its jurisdiction from the province, so it's really part of the provincial crown title. But it is a separate government, and they're important in this whole process. They've been helpful to us to get to here. So we've done surveys, and we know that the herring on Hornby is considered one of the biggest. People are most concerned. It's one of the obvious things people see, and you're going to find a lot more about it. So that's sort of where we are now. So here's a little bit about the fish, and I think everybody was handed out a piece of paper. So I don't know if you had a chance to look at it or not, but these amazing little fish, they live up to 10 years, and they will spawn up to 8 times. Now, one of the issues when you follow through today is think about, right now they're killing them out there when they're 3 years old. If they left them and they fished them when they were older, which is generally how fisheries are managed, they could spawn, the fish that are being caught out there could spawn another 5 times. Or 6 times. And the ones that are being taken for the road, particularly the gillnet fishery, is taking the ones that are about this size and they can get up to that size. Why here? Why not somewhere else? It's a very interesting question. So we have strong tides, there's eelgrass, there's a lot of the things that people say are important here, but there's a lot of this stuff in a lot of other places as well. But they favor here for some reason. The herring in the roe, as we've said, and you're going to hear a lot more about, support high populations of mammals and fish and birds, and that's what all of these maps around you are showing. Why here? Why not somewhere else? It's a very interesting question. So we have strong tides, there's eelgrass, there's a lot of the things that people say are important here, but there's a lot of this stuff in a lot of other places as well. But they favor here for some reason. The herring in the roe, as we said, and you're going to hear a lot more about, support high populations of mammals and fish and birds, and that's what all of these maps around you are showing. You can see on here, up on the highest concentration is from Shingle Spit, right down past, that's Phipps there, that one spot consistently over the years, not every year, not this year yet, I don't think last year either, but consistently over the years, that's been one of the highest concentrations of spawn on that whole chunk from Alaska to Mexico. Now, this shows you the importance of herring to these various species, how much each one of these species relies on herring as part of its diet. So starting here, you can see lingcod, which we have some of them around here. They're slowly recovering, which is a great thing to see. Lingcod, 71% of their diet is herring. And they don't move very far from where they're born. They tend to stay in one place. They don't migrate too much. Chinook salmon, which we call spring salmon, these are the ones that the killer whales like. And 62% of them, that's the big spring salmon that we get around here, fortunately. The coho I mentioned, there's still 58% coho, even though I said they don't eat much coho. This thing's making a liar out of me, right? Because I said, I think this thing's wrong. Could I be wrong? Your dad ever been wrong? No. Okay, so this is wrong. But they do eat, coho do eat a lot of herring. But in our experience, they eat an awful lot of krill. And halibut, 53%, half of their diet comes from herring. 42%, this is what we call gray cod, Pacific cod. Harbor seals, 32%. Sablefish, that's black cod, one of the tastiest, you know, if you're fortunate enough to get that stuff. Dogfish, 12%. Marine birds, you can see the birds out here just gorging on this stuff. The logic would be they harvest 28,000 tons is the quota, 28,000 tons. They say they take 20% of the biomass. So multiply that times 5. You'd think they'd have to find 140,000 tons of herring before they would open it. Wouldn't that make sense? They'd never even come close to that this year when you try to figure it out. And maybe other people can explain it. I asked DFO, I actually sent them an email about a week ago. There's an email site you can send questions to. Guess what? They didn't like my question. When they start fishing, only 10% of their body weight is in the female. When the female gets to 20%, that's roe, that's when they want to harvest it. So of the total body, since they're half male, half female, it's only 10% of the total weight of the fish is actually what's taken for food, which is the eggs. The roast goes to Japan. You'll hear a lot more about that from these other folks. So just a calculation of how many actual 28,000 tons didn't really mean much. That equates to 300 million fish. That's what's taken. That's what they harvest, is 300 million fish a year of herring, which is 20% of a theoretical biomass. These are the issues around the shellfish tenure. What's this got to do with herring? Well, the beach oyster farming in Lambert Channel, there's 8, I just mentioned that. This produces, the value of it is huge. I mean, we human beings cannot satisfy our fish diet with wild fish. We can't do it. It ain't going to happen. We're going to have some form of aquaculture. It's not a matter of whether we're going to do it, it's how are we going to. Can we do it smarter? Can we be more sustainable? And there's, yes, we can, but of course it costs money. And it takes responsibility. So predator netting, as Dory mentioned, is they don't want the seabirds and all these critters coming down and eating their little planted oysters, so they put net over top of it. Well, that stops the herring and everything else and all the other critters from getting and using all the eelgrass and everything else that's in that. So it's kind of the netting is also plastic. So the netting is harmful to the environment as far as the stopping the birds and other marine life from using the water, right? Am I right on all this? And then the plastics obviously are in there, and the tides going in and out, sand's washing in and out, so all of this stuff's acting, and that stuff breaks down in the environment. So you end up with plastic debris, and the plastics then get rolled up and down on the beach, washed around in the sand, broken up, and then there's the chemical reaction of salt water, which is basically a form of acid, that ends up turning those plastics into the microplastics. And that earlier slide shows you getting into those little phytoplankton, and then boom, up it goes through the food chain.
And then I have 3 questions. Does fishing herring affect the rest of the ecosystem? What impacts could climate change have on our herring population? And I'll show you some evidence about what that is. And the third question is not something I've worked on directly myself, but relates to work of others in the group. And the question is, do herring go home to spawn? And so the total catches that we see here in the 50s and 60s go up to a peak of almost 500,000 tonnes of herring, 500,000 tonnes of herring. That figure is more than twice what the official data that you see from our government records, which is about 250,000. But actually, the real catches were about 500,000. So it's not surprising that there was a huge collapse. And the fishery was closed from 1968 for about 4 or 5 years, I think, different places, different years. And then was replaced by the new fishery. Up until that point, most of the fish, there was some for local consumption, but most of the fish was actually dried in a fish meal reduction plant and used for fertilizer and fish feed and pig feed and chicken feed and that kind of thing. So that's this reduction fishery. It actually started in the 1930s in a small way, but became very large. That after the closure, it was that closure coincided by random factors with the collapse of a large, what had formerly been a very large fishery for herring in Japan. The other big problem with this stock assessment for me is that it's only concerned with mathematical models of the herring themselves. How many herring babies are there? How many herring females are there? How many herring eggs will you expect? And it's just a herring. So they do not take account of either the planktonic organisms that the herring eat in order to carry on going, their food. They do not take account of the 20 or more other members of the ecosystem that eat herring. So to get to the fishery itself, it's called a harvest control rule, which is putting a surprising agricultural spin on what's actually capture of wild animals, but still really like the official term, the harvest control rule. Harvesting the herring, well, you didn't plant them, did you? Okay. You may have planted your oysters on the beach, but you didn't plant the herring. Okay, so what you do is you don't open the fishery until there's a certain threshold amount of herring that are there. So if you always have the fishery open, the threshold's 0. So that's 0. That means that of 4 fish that were originally there before there was any fishing, none of them are back, but you go fishing anyway. Right? So that's the always open fishing policy. The other extreme is not to have any fishery, which is over here, and there you all 4 fish that were originally there are there. But the actual policy that's used here is the 25% threshold. So you wait until 1 herring in 4 of those that were there originally is back, and then you open the fishery. If there's less than that there, then you don't fish. And that's the one that's currently used. So the problem with our fishing policy is not that it's precautionary on average, it's not precautionary in terms of hedging the risk against this climate change that's going to happen. So there could be significant changes in the ecosystem. So the answers to my questions are, does fishing affect the rest of the system? Yes, but it can be hedged. What impacts could climate change on our herring? There could be serious consequences that we're not taking account of in management at the moment. And do herring go home to spawn? Yes, and that must be considered in the management.
Pacific herring has multiple values. It has economic value, as depicted by this slide of the commercial roe herring fishery. It has cultural value to the Haida, the indigenous people of Haida Gwaii. It serves as a traditional food. Herring spawn on kelp, which wasn't on the menu today, but maybe at your next herring fest it will be. And so this is an image of herring spawn drying on kelp. It also has important ecological value, which is what Tony Pitcher spoke to you about earlier today, as did Grant. And so you may recognize this very complex slide that Tony put up of the role of Pacific herring within this very complex marine ecosystem. then finally, as a result of those diverse values of herring, we see, and again we saw this earlier this morning, is the trend of the herring spawning biomass in Haida Gwaii, which shows, and we can actually extend this further back in time, but this is a graph from DFO, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans Canada, and so they tend to focus more on the present and the recent past, whereas the Haida tend to focus on the millennial past. So there's a bit of a difference there. But anyway, according to this slide, what you see, let's go back, fast forward into the future, or into the more recent past, and you see from the slide that the herring stocks had collapsed as a result of the reduction fishery that was allowed in Canada then. It is no longer, right? So when herring used to be fished commercially, it was largely to reduce it to fish meal and fish oil, which was then used for fertilizer and aquaculture feed and other animal feed. But that was banned by the federal government. But as a result of that large industrial fishery, then the herring collapsed. And then as a result of the closure, which Tony talked about, the stock started to rebuild. And then at the same time, roughly, the Hokkaido herring stocks also collapsed in Japan, which created a demand for the roe, the eggs of the herring. Consequently, when the fishery was reopened, then there was quite a lucrative commercial fishery for the roe. And so then that's the trend that you see up here. And then again, consequently, of that lucrative roe herring fishery, then again the stocks collapsed, right? And then in Haida Gwaii, and this is specific to Haida Gwaii, there was a closure of the fishery in 2003 for the roe herring fishery. And then in 2005, the spawn and kelp fishery was also closed, the commercial spawn and kelp fishery. So this is the graph of the spawning biomasses, and underneath, this is the catches. And so you can see the closure in the fishery here, and as a result of the closure, then the herring spawning biomass of the stock has started to rebuild. But certainly not to historical abundances. And so then that's a big question, is how long should we leave the fishery closed to give the herring a chance to rebuild? And what we are trying to bring to focus is the importance of community values and ecosystem-based science that DFO should be using, we think, in their management of Pacific herring. So in 2015, we hosted 2 community workshops, one in Old Masset, which is in the northern part, and one in Skidegate, which is more in the middle of Haida Gwaii. And we invited people to come and share with us their perspectives and knowledge on herring, and to see if by listening to their community voice, we could feed that into the management of herring through our research. And then we followed up the community workshops with one-on-one interviews the following year. And what we attempted to do, and have done I guess, is to map local community values, which you might consider doing here, and to model the ecological impacts and risks that Tony showed you, associated with the herring fishery, to try to facilitate a more collaborative governance solution. And so what we've been proposing is that it's important to talk to the local communities like yourselves, as well as the scientists, to try to work together to come up with good governance solutions. So our research team was an interdisciplinary one. This is an image of a number of us very cold in Haida Gwaii 2 years ago in April. And so we've gone on and used a set of value cards, and with diverse sets of groups, including academics, students in Chile, we find that roughly the same hierarchy of values of respect and responsibility being the most important seems to come up on top most of the time. Well, actually, in all those cases that we've interviewed people. And so that's what we're taking away as one of our main findings. And so what we did was we asked the Haida Gwaii community members to discuss the impacts on their values and on these 3 dimensions of society, the ecology, the culture, and the economy of these different herring fishery management scenarios. And so remember I started talking about values, well, and then scenarios. So what we wanted to do is to show somehow a relationship between community members' values and their scenario preferences.
Fisheries put in a system of IDQs, individual vessel quota. That means you got your share. It was allocated to you. Now, out here, when you see them fishing, each seine got a 60-ton quota. Well, that's not enough to make money. 60 tons only filled our back hatches. So they invented company pools and stacking. So what you did, you had, we call them armchair or slipper skippers. Translation, they're sitting at home watching family food or whatever, but they lease out their quota. So we have a whole bunch of owners of licenses who never fish. Stacking, there are 250 licenses, only about 50 boats fish. This is the killer machine. It's called the Prosperity. I fished on her for 15 years, right from she was new to 2005, and my partner, Byron, did something I didn't like. He went up and died, and I lost my job, my old friend. You will not believe how technologically advanced that machine is. I trained that boat to go from Steveston to Prince Rupert all by itself. What? That's right, you just got the little autopilot, and every time you change course, hit the button. That's a waypoint. Got a technical problem, you know, we're on the satellite, you know, it's always looking for the signal, you know. Skipper said, turn that damn thing off, we've got a big snake following us. But, what I'm pointing out here is, the technology is unbelievable. Now, in this boat, we did everything double. 2 sonars. One that looked about 5 miles away, the other one only up short to find the fish. 2 sounders, 1 narrow beam. You like all this stuff? You know, you taking notes? 1 wide beam, 2 sounders, 2 radars, 10 radios, 10 radios. In 1990, cruise share was 40,000 on the salmon. Hello? 30,000 on the herring. They were drinking whiskey. We made a lot of money. We were good at it. Also, we were bad. I've been in fisheries all my life. Grew up with it, fished, worked as a policy guy, have a PhD in fisheries, am involved in it, blah, 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 blah. Big deal. But there's only one simple question.
What is that?
What are the fisheries for?
And that's the problem with the roe industry. We take 10% of the biomass of these fish. 10% of it is roe that's processed and sold in Japan, mainly. And then the other 90% we grind up into fertilizer or fish food for farms or something else. If we could have a fishery that might be a quarter of the size of what it is, which I think is an important thing, it's too big yet. It's too much. That's one thing. If we could do it at a level that we know is sustainable, and we could use it where we use those fish, what we do take, in a much more efficient and effective way, like for food and for a bunch of other uses. Like we ate it last night. I mean, a lot of places in the world, herring are considered a delicacy, right? Canadians just don't tend to eat herring. We got too much other stuff. The difference between the land and the sea, obviously, is you go out on the water. You go along the top of this, you go along the top. Everything's going on underneath. It's part of the mystery. It's part of the mystic of the ocean. You know, you go fishing, you dangle this stuff off the side of a boat, you know, and you try to, and what's going on down there? I mean, it's magic that you could put a line down there and catch this beautiful fish you can bring up, or prawns or crab or all the other things that we get here. And I think that's what it is, you know, it's part of that thing of trying to protect something that's really valuable, really beautiful, and a lot of people, so as you saw yesterday, the number of people that are excited about this whole marine conservation thing is pretty phenomenal.